When I read this passage from the Gospel of John, or when I hear it read, Jesus, gentle Jesus, walking into the temple, braiding cords into a whip, driving out the people and the animals, overturning the tables, shouting at those who remain. When I hear this passage, I think to myself, Jesus should have gone to the workshop on anger management that I went to last week. A few years ago, the Duke Endowment gave the Duke Divinity School a ton of money to research clergy health. And what they've discovered is pretty bad news. In almost every indicator of health, obesity, high blood pressure, depression, heart disease, stress, diabetes, arthritis, in almost every area of health, United Methodist clergy in North Carolina are significantly less healthy than the average population. But research is only half of what this project is about. The other half is about staging what we call these days an intervention. After they studied clergy health, then the Clergy Health Initiative designed a 2-year program called Spirited Life, aimed at improving the health of the clergy who participate. And last week, I went on my first 3-day workshop. It was the beginning for me of my participation in this 2-year program. And I was interested to discover that the first thing they wanted us to learn about health, before we learned about nutrition and exercise and body mass index and losing weight, before we learned any of that, they wanted us to learn how to manage our stress and our anger. So they taught us how to be aware of the negative thoughts and feelings that arise when we encounter a challenging situation. And to first ask this question, are the feelings and emotions that are coming up when I'm in this conflictual situation, are they really appropriate to the situation? I mean, do they match what's going on here, or are they off the scale? And if, as often is the case, our emotions are off the scale, then we learned how to back up a little bit and deal with these negative emotions going on inside of us by techniques like deep breathing and meditation and prayer, so that we could relax and calm the anger inside. And then we'd be able to more deftly approach and deal with the situation facing us. And I think, where was Duke 2,000 years ago when Jesus needed them? And to make matters worse, this scene from the gospel, Jesus cleansing the temple, this is at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. You notice we're only in chapter 2. He hasn't even been at it long enough to be angry with the people he's dealing with. And some of the other gospels writers put this identical scene in the last week of Jesus' life, at the end of his ministry, which is why we read it during Lent. Now, most scholars think that Jesus only did this once, but that the gospel writers are using the editorial license at their discretion to put the scene where they think it's most appropriate to show us something about Jesus. But there are some more conservative scholars who are more interested in making sure that everything is just the way it says it is, who think, no, this actually happened twice. Jesus did this 2 times, at the beginning and at the end, and I think he did it twice. I mean, once we can forgive, right? We can kind of turn away. But we'd think in the next 3 years, he would have his anger under control. Jesus clearly hasn't learned how to manage his emotions. Now, in our culture, managing our emotions is highly valued. Most of us know this by thinking about the trouble we've gotten into when our anger and emotions are out of control. I mean, I wonder how many of us would be interested right now in turning to someone next to us and saying how many people we got angry with in the last week and who they were. Or telling them what some of the things we said to our children this morning were as we tried to get them into the van so we won't be late for church. We especially value self-control around emotions and anger in our leaders, don't we? We expect our leaders to be a step ahead of us, to be better than us. We want them to be steady. We want them to be unflappable in the face of stressful situations. When the rumor gets out that a presidential candidate, perhaps behind the scenes, blows up at his staff and can't keep his anger under control, the electorate gets a little nervous about that person, not wanting them in the White House. Lately, I've enjoyed reading about one of our founding fathers, John Adams, the second president of the United States. And John Adams apparently had a mercurial temper, to say the least. In his retirement, he wrote a 7-volume defense of his presidency that only made matters worse because he could not control the urge to digress again and again into angry rants and tirades and vindictive stories. His temper bedeviled him through his whole career, and it's no wonder that Thomas Jefferson, that stoic sage from Virginia, defeated him when he tried to run for office a second time. And then here's Jesus, bursting into a holy place, flailing a whip, rearranging the furniture, causing a stampede, yelling at those who were there. Can we trust a Savior who has anger issues? Can we follow a Jesus who doesn't meet our expectations for a leader? That's the rub, isn't it? This picture of Jesus angry in the temple, it doesn't fit with our expectations of Jesus. It doesn't match what we need from him. Jesus loves me, this I know. With a whip, he tells me so. Is this necessary? No, we all prefer the gentle shepherd Jesus, don't we? The King of love, my shepherd is. His goodness faileth never. That's the Jesus of our expectations. Many of us, I suspect, have pictures of Jesus. Perhaps in our homes, of Jesus with those clear blue eyes, with cradling a lamb in his arm, or a lamb gently placed over his shoulders. Maybe that picture's in the nursery over there in the other building, or you have it above the crib in your child's nursery. But how many of us have a picture of Jesus swinging a whip, chasing the lambs out of the temple? Not likely. We prefer the Jesus of that poem by William Blake, The Lamb, that we all studied in high school. Remember that one? Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead, gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright, gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I'll tell thee, little lamb, I'll tell thee, he is called by thy name. For he calls himself a lamb, he is meek, and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. He is meek and he is mild. That's the Jesus of our expectations. Duke professor and theologian Stanley Hauerwas likes to joke that we Methodists have one clear conviction about God. One thing we can all agree on, and that's this: that God is nice. And there's a corollary to that conviction, that we should be nice too. It's the theme of every children's sermon, right? God is nice, and we should be nice too. A lot of us grew up in churches going to Sunday school every Sunday morning of our lives, and there's no more than that we got out of it. God is nice, and we should be nice too. I wish I had a quarter for every time someone said to me, I'm not a big fan of that God of the Old Testament. the moody, vindictive, angry God of the Old Testament. No, I like the God of the New Testament, the one who is love, the one who is nice. To which I want to ask, you mean this God of the New Testament? The one with the whip? The one defending and cleansing the temple of that angry Old Testament God? Jesus rushes on to the scene, and we realize this God cannot, the God revealed to us in Jesus cannot fit into the box we've made for him. This God's job is not to meet our expectations. Now, I wish with everything in me that I could soften this picture, that I could airbrush it a little bit. In fact, I'm thankful that this is a children's church Sunday so that my own kids won't pester me in the van on the way home. What was Jesus doing with a whip? What's that mean, Dad? We can put it off a few more years. I wish I could wring some meaning out of this story, something inspiring that would give us goosebumps, or at least a little nugget of wisdom that would help us get through our week next week. I'd like to be able to use that classic trick of interpretation when I tell you what it really means in the original Greek. Well, to understand this picture of what looks like an angry Jesus, you have to know that in the original Greek, the word for whip is more like our word for feather duster, right? Yeah, I mean, Jesus was just shooing them out of more like this. Oh, go on, y'all, get on out of here. Or maybe we could imagine a fuller circumstance here. It doesn't say so, but we could say something like, well, these people selling the animals in the temple for sacrifice, they're fixing prices. And so they're taking advantage, especially of the poor and of all the foreigners who have come to the temple but couldn't bring their own animals with them. There's price fixing going on here. Or these money changers who are exchanging the currency of the foreigners who have come in but have to buy the animals here. They're manipulating the exchange rate. There's injustice here in the temple, and that's what Jesus is angry about. This is called righteous indignation. And that might be so. It doesn't say all that, but that could definitely be the case. But still, wouldn't we expect, even if it's righteous indignation, wouldn't we expect Jesus to act more like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., facing injustice, anger-rousing injustice, with measured self-control? Isn't that what we'd expect? But maybe there's no more meaning to this picture of an angry Jesus in the temple than the picture itself. Maybe there's no more meaning to this story than the story itself. Maybe it's this just there. Jesus revealing to us a God who doesn't meet our expectations. A God who won't live by the rules of polite society. A God who we can't snugly fit into the box we've made with the word printed on the outside, God. There's that wonderful scene in C.S. Lewis's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when all the children have finally gotten into Narnia and they've met the beavers. And the beavers are hosting them at dinner and explaining to them what's going on, telling the children about the White Witch and how she's laid this curse on Narnia so there's an endless winter. But the rumor is that Aslan is on the move, and you, children, will meet Aslan. And Lucy says, is he a man? Oh, no, Mrs. Beaver says, Aslan is not a man. He's a lion. He's the king of the beasts. He's the son of the great emperor across the sea. He is the great lion. Susan says, well, is he quite safe? Because I would be nervous meeting a lion. And Mrs. Beaver said, of course You'd be nervous. I can't imagine anyone standing before Aslan without their knees knocking together. Either you'd be braver than most or plain silly to do it. And so Lucy says, so he isn't safe then. Safe, says Mr. Beaver. Who said anything about safe? Of course he's not safe, but he's good. Safe is what we expect from a God. Good is what we need. The people of Jesus' day didn't think he was safe either. They didn't think an outburst like this in the temple is any more appropriate than we would. And so they decided they would need to contain him. Jesus knew that they would do this. That's why he said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will build it up again. He was not talking about the temple he just cleansed, the temple of stone that he called his Father's house. He was talking about the temple of his body. If they were going to contain him, they would have to destroy this temple of God's presence that was his very life. In other words, they'd have to kill him. And when they did, when they would kill him, when they would desecrate the temple of his body, there would be no one there to rush in and drive them away. The only whip would be the one lashing his back on the day he died. The only money being exchanged would be the money paid as a bribe to his betrayer. The only lamb being sold for a sacrifice would be Jesus himself. To contain him, we thought, to contain him, they would have to close him in the box of the grave and seal it with a stone. That way we'll be safe. Safe from his meddling. That will make us safe. Safe from his meddling in our lives, his meddling in our church, his meddling in the world. Seal him in the box of death. That will keep us safe. Safe. Will that keep us safe? I don't know. Thank goodness with this God, there's no way to know what to expect. Amen.